I experienced an event where I had to defend myself or my life. One time, me and my sister was walking home from an after-school program. We were about 15 at the time. We got attacked by a local gang called the Young Fam. Sister defended herself, tried not to get raped, I guess. She gets stabbed in the neck. She goes down. The attacker and his friends turned their attention towards me. I go down. I was forced to defend myself, kicking my legs, holding my arm up. I got multiple slash wounds on my left arm. Someone called the police. I look over to my sister. She's dead without me even realizing it.
Welcome to the Live Safe Academy LLC podcast, where your safety is our priority. Assault and crime prevention, first aid, chemical defense spray, sharp weapons, impact weapons, tasers, and firearms. Visit us online at livesafeacademy.com, because when all you have is seconds, the only thing you can count on is yourself.
Welcome to the Live Safe Academy podcast. My name is Ian Kinder, and I'm the owner and the founder of Live Safe Academy. This is podcast number 11, How to Carry a Handgun Concealed for Self-Defense. I'm interviewing Lou Chiodo of Gunfighters Limited. You can reach him at gunfighterslimited.com. And before we start this podcast, I want to give you some resources that are going to go hand in hand with the subject that we're going to discuss today. The first one is podcast number 6, How to Select a Handgun for Self-Defense. And that's also featuring Lou Chiodo. I also have an article that I wrote, post number 1, Handgun and Caliber Selection. And we also have an after podcast show, one of our YouTube videos on how to select a handgun for self-defense. And what's neat about that video is you'll have a chance to see some of the things that we're talking about, both in the article and in the podcast. But all three of those are great references that are going to go hand in hand with the subject that we're covering today. And you can get all three of those resources at livesafeacademy.com/handgun selection. livesafeacademy.com/handgun selection. So Lou, thank you very much for being a part of our show.
Well, you're welcome, Ian. Great being with you.
Well, this is obviously a very important topic, and kind of let me lay the context out for this from my perspective. My school, Live Safe Academy, we're one of the very first schools to teach the current training requirements to get a concealed pistol license in Michigan all the way back in 2000 when the law was first reformed. It went into effect in 2001, but it was signed in 2000. And one of the things that I observed is that people will go out there, they'll get their concealed pistol license, then they're not sure how to carry the gun. And so what they'll do is they'll spend a lot of money on these different carry holsters. They won't find anything that's comfortable, and then eventually they just don't carry the gun because they can't find something that's comfortable for them. And that, of course, defeats the purpose of the concealed pistol license. Now, in our class, we talk about carry methods, but it's not actually required by the state, and it's not in the NRA lesson plan that corresponds with the state requirements. So we cover it as an extra topic, but a lot of people never get that information. And so the purpose of today's podcast is to help cover those issues so people don't fall into that trap. Now, Lou, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I agree with what you're saying because many times people will buy a particular handgun, they'll get a holster for it, wear the gun and holster for a day or two and find out that it just doesn't work for them. And I think probably one of the worst things that can happen, particularly for someone who has made that choice and decision to carry concealed, is to not put together a system that works for them. So it leads to them not carrying the handgun in the first place. And that defeats the whole purpose of them making that choice and doing the classes that they attend and buying equipment and spending money on it only to find out that this just doesn't work for me.
Now, the other problem where I see this is in law enforcement. People get trained in the academy to carry, in uniform, open carry. They go to their departments. It's the same thing. Unless they become detectives, they really never even address in any type of formal training how to carry concealed. So this is also an issue I see for law enforcement when they're carrying off duty or when they're undercover or in plain clothes. So I think this is a really important topic. And what subject do you want to start with first, Lou?
Well, I think it's probably a good idea to talk about some just general principles, if you will, that surround this whole issue of concealed carry. And one of them, to start it off with, will be how you carry your particular handgun that you choose can be dependent upon the type of lifestyle that you lead. As an example, if you spend a lot of time in extremely casual clothing that sometimes doesn't, let's say, offer you a solid belt to mount your holster on, or living out here in a state where there's beaches and people spend time there, how you dress for those occasions can be distinctly different than how someone may dress somewhere else. So the type of lifestyle that you lead and the places where you go and the activities that you do can have a profound impact on concealed carry.
So like a lot of the things we talk about, there's not one exclusive right way. Each individual is going to have to make a personal choice. What's the best method for them? And with any choice that we make, there's always going to be a collection of pros and cons, and we just want to select the best situation for our circumstances.
Well, absolutely. And you hit on a real important thing about personal preference. This is an important factor because, let's face it, everybody is somewhat different in what they want, how they want to carry their particular handgun. So that is going to factor into this overall discussion that we have. And one of the other topics that I think is very important is that personal preference can be because of their physical stature, their body type, their ability to conceal a particular handgun that they choose based on just the way they are. Whether they are slim, whether they may be a little bit more heavy set, maybe they're very tall. All of these things factor into how we can conceal a particular handgun.
Now, another issue I think is really important, Lou, and please tell me what you think about this, is comfort. And we both kind of already covered this issue, but if a gun's not comfortable, people just aren't going to carry consistently. When you first have the ability to carry a gun concealed, whether it's because you are now a law enforcement officer or it's because you just got your concealed pistol license or whatever your circumstances are, you'll carry a bazooka made out of cactus and you're not going to care because you're just so happy that you got that gun. But, it doesn't take long for that honeymoon to wear off. Pretty soon, notice, oh man, the gun's starting to pinch me here, it's poking me here, it's heavy here, whatever. And then you start thinking to yourself, hey, I'm just going to go get bread. I don't need a gun to go get bread. Or I'm just going to this location. I don't need a gun for that. And pretty soon carrying that gun becomes more of an event than a pattern. And, of course, how we carry our guns, where we carry our guns, that's always going to be a personal choice. But we don't want to be caught in a situation where we need it and we don't have it because it was uncomfortable to carry.
Well, exactly. And the whole issue of comfort is probably critical to the issue of carrying. And the thing is that you probably won't really know if whatever handgun and whatever holster and method of carry that you choose is actually going to be comfortable until you actually have the opportunity to put that whole system together and actually wear it for extended periods of time. If you just simply put a holster on a belt in whichever one you choose and put whatever handgun you choose into it and just stand there and look in the mirror or whatever you're doing and get the idea that is going to be the way it's going to feel as you're, let's say, sitting, you're driving around in your vehicle, you're going through your everyday maneuvers, if you will, wherever you happen to be, either shopping or out in the general public. You just don't know this until you actually put it to use in the exact environment in which you're going to carry. And this is why, I think most of the audience here that's carrying concealed and have gone through a lot of these things probably have a box or a drawer that they have several different holsters that they've purchased and found out that that really doesn't work for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I have my box of holsters, and most people I know that carry concealed, they also have their box of holsters, or worse, they don't use a holster and they just stick a gun in their pants, and that's something else we'll talk about. But so we agree that comfort is a critical issue, because if the gun's not comfortable, people just aren't going to wear it consistently. And the whole point of having a gun that's quickly accessible is that we don't know when the emergency is going to happen. So we need to have that gear with us. If the gear's not with us, it's obviously not going to protect us. What's the next criteria that people should consider when they're selecting a carry method? And let me kind of put this into context for the listeners. What Lou and I wanted to talk about today was not to say this carry method or that carry method, and we will get into holster designs. If not in this show, then we'll do it in a part 2. But we want to talk about the selection process that people can kind of go through as a checklist to help them, to help you, the listener, when you're making your choice. And I will have this in a cheat sheet format as a PDF that if anybody wants to contact our school, Live Safe Academy, we'll be happy to provide you that free of charge. But Lou, what's the next criteria that people should consider when they're selecting a carry method?
Well, the next thing we can link into the discussion is consistency of carry, meaning that once we've made a selection of a handgun, we have work through this process of finding out that, yes, this carry method with this holster and with this particular handgun is comfortable for me to use through my daily activities. Then what we like to do as much as we can is be consistent with that carry method. And part of the reason for that is that, like all things that we try to do when we talk about self-defense issues, practice becomes important. And once we've selected this particular method of carry, we want to practice it so that we get very not only consistent with its location, but consistent with the way that we can deploy that weapon from that location. The two of them kind of work hand in hand. And the more we can be consistent, the better it is for us, because, of course, we're teaching a psychomotor skill, if you will, where your hand is having to go to a particular location, deal with whatever type of holster you've chosen, and bring that weapon to bear on a particular threat. So we want to make sure that we're consistent as much as we can with the preferred method carry, and as much as possible stick with it once we've gotten it.
I have a friend of mine that every time I see him, he's carrying his gun in a different place, and he determines how he carries his gun that day based on what gun he's carrying and what he's wearing that day. And, of course, the obvious problem with that is in those fractions of a second, when you're not operating from your analytical brain, which is your problem solver, you can, when you're just standing there and there's no stress involved, you can remember, I've got my gun here, I've got my gun there, and it doesn't seem like a big deal. But when you get into that survival stress mode where you're operating out of your primitive brain, which is reactionary, not analytical, that primitive brain is going to want to act off of a reaction to go to wherever it expects that gun to be. And if the gun's not there, you don't want to be doing a pat down trying to figure out, oh, shoot, where is it I carried my gun today? You want to have that immediate reaction where that hand goes to where the gun is. And I'll put just one real quick example of this, Lou, and I know you have many experiences like this that you can share too. I had a friend of mine that described the shooting he was in, and the way he said it is very informative. He said, I saw my sergeant shooting, and then I realized I was shooting too. that initial response for him to draw that gun and start shooting was a primitive reaction because the intellectual brain couldn't keep up with what was happening. Like when you pull your hand off of a hot stove and then you realize after you pull your hand away, you're conscious of the fact, oh, that stove was hot. Well, in this case, his intellectual brain couldn't keep up. So his primitive brain took over, started the process of shooting, and then when he got to a point where he said, and then I realized I was shooting too, is when his intellectual brain caught up with what was happening. And that's not a statement of intelligence. It's just the intellectual brain is very thorough and slow, and the primitive brain is very fast, but it's reactionary. Well, imagine in that subconscious frame of mind, and I hope subconscious is the correct term, where you're going for your gun not with a deliberate thought, but out of a primitive reaction. If that gun's not where your brain expects it to be, you're going to cause yourself all kinds of problems in those fractions of a second where you're already late because you're reacting to something in progress. You just don't have the time to give up.
Well, I absolutely agree, and we saw this type of thing happen to people out in the field when they do something as minor as change locations of gear on their duty belt. And it's a process you have to go through to kind of readjust your mind and body to know that, okay, my handcuffs are no longer where it used to be, but they're here, or my magazines are no longer in that exact spot. I've relocated them somewhere else on the belt. So this is a pretty important thing. If I can make one quick point in here that I think will be helpful in the discussion, is that if you can remember, we ran a workshop in which we had people drawing from concealment, and one of the things that we did was we had them as part of the curriculum test out various portions of their body to carry that weapon on, to give them an idea of what the difference would feel like from one position to the other. And this can be sometimes helpful as you're trying to develop that magical place where you want to conceal your handgun, so that you can have an idea of what does one positioning do for me as opposed to the other. And that leads you to where, once you find it, to this whole issue of being consistent with these issues that you just brought up about hands going to a place where they're familiar, and all the ramifications with that when you're under high stress.
Absolutely. And, one thing I'll say for the listeners, too, is that you may at some point make an intellectual decision. I feel like it would be better to change where I carry my gun, and that's okay if it's a deliberate choice. But then now the next step to that decision is doing the training to make that new position a position that you can go to on a reactionary level. But the difference there is that you would be making an informed decision to make a change that you're then going to train to support that decision. What you don't want to do is what I mentioned earlier, that friend I have that every day, depending on the gun that he has or the clothing that he's wearing, changes the place that he carries his gun. That's the mistake that could cause you a lot of problems. And, we just spent a significant amount of time discussing one specific criteria that would be, frankly, very easy to overlook and underappreciate, but it's one of those issues that can be the difference between success and failure. So consistency is very important. Comfort is very important. Lou, what do you think is the next criteria that people need to consider?
Well, I think the next thing that is really important as it relates to actually now taking that weapon and defending yourself with it is going to be the speed at which you can deploy that handgun in an actual scenario that requires you to draw it and potentially fire it. And the reason why speed can be very important is that this kind of links to things that we talked about in other podcasts and other training events that we did, and that is that usually with the way that we have to deploy handguns concealed for actual self-defense, it's usually in response to what someone else has started. Because we generally, when we're concealed carry and going about our business, if we really have to draw that weapon and engage a threat, it's going to usually be because that threat has done something to cause it to happen. We're not out there drawing our guns for no reason and pointing it at people or drawing it and putting it in our hand because we just want to have it there. We're drawing it because someone else has done something in our environment that threatens our life or threatens to do serious bodily harm to us or someone else around us. So in this process of concealed carry and selecting equipment and selecting handguns and all of it kind of interrelates, we have to have a system established that based on the way that we're dressed and based on where we carry that particular handgun, we simply have to be able to get that weapon system into the fight as rapidly as we can to ensure our safety.
And for folks that are interested, I do have an article on my website also called Speed of Engagement. That's post number 2. And, like you said, we're usually reacting to something that's already in progress. So however much time we have to react, you usually have to put a minus sign in front of that number because you're already late before you begin. And if people go to our video series, Real Encounters, they'll see how quickly violent altercations happen. And in the one that I did with Joe Ferreira with the shooting in the party store was a particularly good example of this, though the one that you and I did of the stabbing was also, I think, a very good example of this. But in both cases, things happened so fast that the person who was the target really had just fractions of a second to react. And in all of those cases, the assault was already in progress as they're trying to figure out what's happening to them. And so if we can't get our weapon deployed quickly, then that weapon's just not going to be in play in a time frame that's going to help to protect us.
Oh, absolutely. And, this the issue of speed is very critical. And in one regard, I can point it out, beyond the equipment issue and the placement of the weapon on there, you have to remember that as you're going through the process of determining if that weapon is going to be needed in the first place, there's going to be a certain amount of lag time there when you're analyzing and trying to orient on the environment, meaning, do I need to draw this weapon? So when you're looking at how fast you can actually do these things, it would probably be somewhat inaccurate to just say that you get a timer, you put it on delay, and when it goes off, you access the weapon in whatever way you have to based on the way you conceal it, draw it, and pull the trigger. Added into that amount of time has to be this decision-making that is going to be necessary in a real environment. And I think this is this is why the issue of where you have your weapon, the consistency and where it is so that when you need it, you're going to be able to get to it rapidly, and the speed in which you can draw it is going to be critical, is because you're already in a deficit in most of these scenarios to where you have to figure out, do I need to even draw this thing in the first place? There's that lag time that we have to factor in addition to the actual drawing of the weapon.
Yeah, that's why force-on-force training is so important, why you and I are such big advocates of it. And Lou, you turned me onto a book that actually was brought up in a previous podcast number 9, where I interviewed John Manji. He brought up the book Blink, which I immediately pointed out was a book that you introduced me to. And excuse me for the cough, guys, but that book is great because, it teaches you how the brain works in regard to vision and the things that are going to be able to trigger our response in a real altercation, and why, force-on-force training is so important, so that you're actually seeing actions that you have to react to rather than just the passive targets of paper, steel, and cardboard. And, there's that inevitable, unavoidable gap between action and reaction. The smaller that gap is, the better it is for us. And, this is all about recognition and response. And the less time we spend in the recognition phase, the less time we spend in the response phase, the less time that they're acting and we're not, the better off we are. So a big part of that is having equipment that allows us to deploy our gun quickly, and not just in the standard draw, but also, God forbid, if our primary hand is not accessible for any reason, how quickly can we get to a gun or some weapon that's going to make a difference with our support hand, our non-weapon hand, or people sometimes use strong hand, weak hand. We don't use that. We use primary hand and support hand. But how quickly can you get to a weapon, even if it's not your primary weapon, with that support hand? And we did a workshop. Well, you did a workshop. I hosted it, but you taught it, where you talked about those issues. What to do if you're, for whatever reason, can't deploy your weapon with your primary hand. And it was so funny because even though that was the title of the workshop and everybody knew why they were there, as soon as you started talking about drawing the gun with your support hand, everybody got this very uncomfortable look on their face, and they all started to reposition their holsters so that they could get to it with their support hand. And I caught that right away, and I'm like, no. Obviously you're not going to be able to set the stage like that in a real situation. You got to pick your carry gear so that, the totality of your carry gear, even if it's not your primary gun, the totality of your carry gear, a second gun, whatever, so that you can deploy it with that support hand quick enough that it can make a difference.
Absolutely.
What's the next criteria here that you think is important, Lou?
Well, I think we need to add in this idea of simplicity to the overall thing that we're talking about here. What we mean by that is that we don't have to imagine too far that if all of a sudden you're confronted with a lethal threat and your mind and your body knows that this is it, within this very short period of time, good things are going to happen for me or bad things are going to happen to me. Simplicity is going to become a very critical factor on how we can deploy that weapon at the speed necessary to be able to get on top of the scenario that we find ourselves in. And I think we both use pretty much the same terms on this, in that we have to be able to basically grab, point, and shoot the weapon as rapidly as we can. Because remember, we're not talking about doing real distance shooting here. The probability of you having to deploy your weapon against another person trying to do you that type of physical harm is going to be that you're very, very close to them. Now, how close? We use general guidelines here at touching distance out to maybe 7 yards. So we're not talking about doing 15, 20, 25-yard shooting where you may have if you're that far away from someone, have the ability to stop moving to cover, egress from the area. There's other factors that tactically we could talk about. But when we're talking about this spontaneous thing that happens right in front of us at very close range, the simpler our systems are, both weapon and holster, when we talk specifically about concealed carry, the better it's going to be for us. There's issues here about concealed carry that are different from, let's say, a police officer or a trooper, as I was, where you have open carry, you get in physical confrontations with people at not say a frequent rate, but we get into enough physical confrontations with people to where retention brings in a whole other issue. Remember, a lot of your retention concealed carry is the fact that it's concealed. People don't know that you have it initially until you want them to know it. So we need something that's going to allow us to be able to get to the grip of your weapon very quickly. We need it in a position where simple hand movement can get to it rapidly. And the weapon system itself should be as simple as possible to be able to bring into service, to where we don't have to have issues where some people have with having to disengage safeties and things of that nature, or they may have a weapon that they're carrying around that they've kept the chamber cold in their semi-automatic and need to draw it and rack around in the chamber before they shoot it. All of these things can add to the the delaying of your ability to respond to the threat. So when we're choosing equipment, both gun and holster, we should probably have in the forefront of our mind that whatever I choose should be simple enough to operate in the most adverse conditions I could probably find myself in.
Yeah, Lou, I also, just like you do, and I may have learned it from you, is a grab, point, shoot principle. I think is really important because under stress, when people are acting on that primitive level, they're going to want things to be as fast and as simple as possible. And anything that you add to that grab, point, shoot is going to create the potential for performance issues like retention devices on a holster or like safeties on the manual safeties on a gun that you have to disengage. Or, like you said, if they're carrying the gun without a cartridge in the chamber so that they have to cycle the slide and load around into the chamber before they can shoot the gun. You know, you would never catch a modern-day police department doing that because they know that they could never deploy that weapon quick enough if they had to chamber around first. You know, those are all things that can create win and lose type of performance issues. Now, there are times when people do need retention devices on their holster, like you said, if they're carrying openly, like a police officer or somebody that is some type of a security role, or, you know, some people, they open carry their guns, and under those circumstances, you know, just for personal defense, they open carry their guns, they don't conceal them. You know, having a retention device on that gun, on that holster is important. But when the gun's concealed, out of sight, out of mind, the best method of retention when you're carrying concealed, like you said, is the concealment. So the point is, you don't want to add anything to that grab, point, shoot. You want a deployment that is as rapid and as simple as possible. Lou,
And if I could add one quick thing in there, because we've discussed this in other podcasts, but maybe someone has not heard it yet. With this whole issue of simplicity, I have to emphasize that we're pretty hot on doing force-on-force training. And there's real reasons for that, and that is that you have to try to take people into as close an environment as they're going to operate in for real in a training environment. And where you really see this issue of simplicity come out is when you start doing things force on force, real time, with the way you're carrying your weapon and all of the clothing and all of these things we've talked about having to be dealt with simultaneously. So if, you know, one of the things that we always recommend, if at all possible, is in the appropriate environments, doing some level of force-on-force training with your gear, and as we do, we use a lot of airsoft equipment in the training that we do. If you're carrying a weapon that has a manual safety on it, such as a 1911, superb weapon system. You know, I carried them for years. It was my primary weapon when I was a Marine officer. But when you talk about having to deal with the totality of all these things we're talking about, and then add in the fact that you now have to manually remove the safety so that you can actually fire it, you should do that in as real environment as you can without getting into that gunfight scenario, so that you can make it more of a part of what your overall training package is, so that you're not surprised with the fact that I've seen it on numerous occasions, people reverting back to the point, you know, grab, point, shoot scenario, and have problems manipulating that safety. So that all comes under this umbrella of simplicity, but it's the simplicity also has to be talked about in context of actually deploying that weapon in an environment which is going to be similar to where you're going to fight.
Yeah, absolutely. And another option that people would have, which is not as good as force-on-force training, but something that they can do themselves to give them practice and a little bit more perspective, is if they have a heavy bag, excuse me again for the coughing, if they have a heavy bag They can dry fire, which means not only do they verify repeatedly that the gun is unloaded, but that they make sure they're in an ammunition-free area. If they have a heavy bag and they go into hitting that heavy bag very forcefully, very aggressively, very fast for 30 seconds or so, and then have to rapidly deploy their gun and dry fire at the bag, that'll give them a really good feedback or sense for what it's like to get amped up and then have to rapidly transition. And if they're having to disengage that retention device, if they're having to disengage that safety, that'll give them a kind of a feel for what that's going to be like. And an even better way to do that is when you have somebody that's calling the threat command. So there you are banging on that bag as hard and as fast as you can, and at a random point that you don't know ahead of time, they call threat, and then you have to rapidly disengage the bag, draw your gun, and dry fire at it. Again, with all the appropriate safety protocols, that's kind of a toe in the water, not only to practice this, but also to get a kind of feel for how your gear's working for you. But again, that's not force-on-force training, and force-on-force training is not real combat. So we always have to be careful about the conclusions that we draw on training, but those training methods can give us a better perspective for how our skills are going to work under real conditions.
Absolutely.
Now, I know another issue that you and I talk about a lot is accessibility, and we already kind of discussed this issue. But, again, I always think back to that workshop that you taught and how everybody got that look in their face and in their eyes, and they started inching those holsters over towards those other hands. You really got to consider. And this is another area where retention devices and manual safeties become a big issue. You may feel like you got it down pat. I can disengage that thumb snap or that push button release or whatever, but when you start trying to use your other hand to draw that gun out of that holster, or you've got that gun in the other hand and you're trying to disengage that safety, man, your brain didn't sign up for that. And that now gets us into that problem where if your analytical brain isn't engaged and you're acting out of that reactionary brain, that primitive brain, those problems can be problems that you can't solve in time. So what are your thoughts about accessibility?
Well, it's probably one of those other points that's critical to the whole picture. And, we've discussed it somewhat during the course of this podcast, but I think as a general rule, if you're going to carry one gun in one position, you need to find out if that handgun is going to be accessible with both hands and under conditions that will simulate the speed of which you have to be able to get that weapon into service. And this can be done, basically in a ammo-free zone with downloaded weapons. Put your gear on and see if you can actually get to it. In a brief time, we'll go ahead and talk about some options about this. But if you're going to just carry that one handgun, this is something to consider about where you're carrying it, because it's going to be of no value to you if you all of a sudden get an injury to your primary hand. And how can we injure it? We both know that a certain number of these events are going to be preceded by some kind of physical altercation between people. So let's say, for example, you just took your hottest shot on someone's head and the head kind of moved in a little way to where now you broke your wrist or you broke your hand while punching them. Does this happen to people in the real world? I've seen it happen several times with officers in the field where they've injured their hand striking people. Now, if the fight goes to the point where they would have needed a primary weapon to be brought into it, it's going to be kind of hard doing that if you've injured your hand in a physical fight. The second way that you can injure that hand is you just get shot there. Without going into big detail, but one of the shooting incidents that occurred during my time with my agency was right off the bat, first shot blew off the thumb of the officer, unable to get the gun out of the holster in time enough to do anything, and winds up paying an ultimate price for it. So these things in the real world happen, and if you can't get to that weapon, it can't be utilized into the fight. And if you've injured your hand, or you took a shot in your shoulder or something that is going to make that whole arm inoperable for some period of time, just having the weapon on your body doesn't mean that you're going to be able to get it into the fight that you're in.
Absolutely. And the kind of standard I like to pass on to people is that they're able to. It's winter time here in Michigan, guys, and sometimes, unfortunately, I'll catch a sinus thing, and that's why I'm coughing a little bit today. I apologize. If I'm able to edit some of these coughs out, I will. If not, just please excuse me. But, you want to be able to draw the gun ideally with only one hand, and you want to be able to hopefully draw it with either hand, and you'd like to also be able to, if possible, holster it with one hand. Holstering, it's not the biggest deal in the world because you can always use a pocket to holster a gun, because once you get to that point that you're holstering the gun, the immediate need of speed is now over, and there are still things that have to happen, and they still have to happen in a timely fashion even after you've dealt with the threat in regard to that gun. But it's not the same. It's not the same sense of urgency and speed that you have to get the gun out of the holster with. But again, be able to draw the gun with one hand, ideally with either hand, and to also be able to holster the gun with one hand, or at least to put the gun into a pocket with one hand. Those things are ideal for all the reasons that you talked about, Lou. What about what's another criteria that you think people need to think about here?
Well, the major topic that we're talking about is concealed carry. So the next thing that I think would be of value to talk about is the concealability aspect of the handgun and holster that you've chosen to use as your concealed carry package. This gets back to the some of the very first things we talked about, which was your lifestyle, your body type, the way you normally have to dress. All of this can impact the particular handgun and holster that you choose for that handgun when it comes to how concealed is it going to be on my body so it isn't detected. And here's where, you got to look at the choices that you make as to what you intend to carry. And you have to have a real honest assessment of, is this weapon too big? Is the holster too bulky? These are all factors that are going to have some kind of impact on concealability. So whatever you happen to choose, you have to, part of this deal about concealed carry is that you don't want to be detected unless it's absolutely necessary. And that should be because you want that weapon present in whatever you're in, not because someone sees it because you bend over or your clothing is so tight that it's printing. These are all issues that you have to kind of work through as you're determining what you want to carry, the manner in which you want to carry it as far as positioning, and the type of holster that you carry. All of these things factor in simultaneously to determine how concealable that particular weapon system is going to be.
And printing, for those who don't know, just means that you can see the shape of the gun through the clothing, or an obvious bulge in the clothing that would make people question whether or not it's a gun, or at least draw attention to the fact that something's there. And I'll give you an example of this that I've seen firsthand quite a few times. Is people carry the gun, they carry it behind the hip, which is a very standard place to carry the gun, and it's not anything I'm being critical of because it's got its valid points to it. But because the gun is behind their field of view, because they're carrying it behind the hip, I've seen many times where the shirt has come up, and now the gun is fully exposed. Now in Michigan, you can open carry. Anybody that can lawfully possess a gun can open carry the gun, so that wouldn't be a legal issue in most cases. But if you want to, if the goal is to have the gun be concealed, then you obviously want to make sure that the gun's concealed. And I carry in the appendix the position, which is the opposite of carrying it so that it's behind the hip. I've also had my shirt come up, in all the years that I've been carrying. It's happened maybe once or twice. But I knew it immediately because the gun's in front of me. I can see it, and then I can immediately cover it back up again. So, it's just one of the things to think about, that if the shirt rides up, maybe my gun is fully exposed, I'm walking around, and I don't even know that I have a fully exposed gun, just because I can't see it. Now, I know security is another big issue here, and this applies to a couple different things. We need the gun to be carried securely in the holster so that the gun doesn't fall out, as an example. Now, I know this sounds funny, but I know I know a couple people, and I've also witnessed this happen, where people just stick their gun in their waistband, and then the next thing you know, they're walking, the gun slides through their waistband, and it falls through the leg of their pants, and as they're walking, the gun gets kicked out from the bottom of the leg of their pants, and it's spinning in front of them. All cops, by the way, not to make fun, but it is kind of funny that it just all happened to be cops. But the point is you don't just want to stick a gun in your waistband like that. You want to have a holster so that gun is securely in place, and it's not just going to fall out. But also, even though we would be cautious about people having retention devices on their holster if they're not truly needed, and there are times when it's needed, but if it's not needed, we would caution people against that. But you do want a holster that keeps a gun securely in place, so that if you do get in a physical altercation, or you just fall, or you trip, or you're walking on ice in Michigan and you land on your butt because you hit a patch of ice, you don't want that gun to come out. You want that gun to be securely in that holster.
Well, this is a real important point, because you do see people do that. If I can interject a real live incident, something that happened to me, I made a stop on a potential driving under the influence type of scenario, because a guy was weaving all over the road on a surface street area. Took a long time to stop. Eventually gets out of the car. He is under the influence, and when I told him that, I saw it in his eye, and within a split second, he bolts on me, takes off running. And as he's running, I first hear a kind of metallic sound from the ground, and as I'm running past where I just heard this sound, sure enough, there's a handgun sitting on the ground that did the same thing you just talked about. Through the pants, down his leg, and lands there. The only problem with this particular individual, that he was on parole for murder, and he had a car full of dope in the trunk and in the rear passenger area there. But the problem that he also had was, in questioning him later, because we did apprehend him, was that he hesitated to draw on me because that was his initial intention. And part of it was because he had felt this thing kind of slip down his waistband.
Oh, wow.
So, this is real life there, and it's just the way things work. I mean, there's plenty of great holsters out there that you can definitely find something that is going to more than adequately retain your handgun, particularly if you're carrying inside the waistband. There's a lot of stuff out there, and there's no need to slip it in your waistband to only have it slip down your pants. Absolutely.
Lou, word about I think maybe the 45-minute mark. I think I know how this would go perfect. I don't think we need to do a second podcast on this, because I think what we won't cover in this podcast are the different carry options, the holsters, because that would be perfect for the after podcast show. And remember, the after podcast show for the listeners, that's on our YouTube channel. That's where we get a chance to discuss the same issues, but we discuss them in a video. And like we did with a handgun selection, that was a perfect complement to the podcast, because people can actually see the things that we were talking about. So here, talking about the principles is the best format is this podcast, but showing the different holster options, well, that's perfect for the video. And I think between the after podcast show where we can talk about different holster designs, is a perfect complement to the podcast today, where we're talking about the different concepts for selecting a carry method. And if you agree with that, then I think what I'll do is I'll just, because we're right at the end here, I'll cover just a couple of the talking points that are left. You and I will discuss them, and then we'll save the actual holsters for the after podcast show. How's that?
Sure, absolutely. No problem at all.
Guys. And then if you're not on our YouTube channel, go out there, Live Safe Academy on YouTube, and you'll see our other after podcast shows. But particularly for this topic, I think that will be a perfect format. But I'm going to go through the list here that we have for additional concerns or things to consider. And I'm actually going to go through them backwards, because there's one particular one that's going to take a little bit longer, and I want to save that one for last. So let's just talk about carrying additional ammunition. Now, statistically, in real fights, reloading a gun almost never happens, and you please, Lou, you correct me if I'm wrong, but this is my understanding. And where people do reload their gun, it's usually almost after the fact. So, in other words, the fight's over, they think to themselves, oh shoot, I better reload just in case. But at that point, the fight's already over, so the reload didn't actually have an impact on the outcome of that altercation. So if you're going to go hardcore statistics, reloading guns almost never happens. However, I do still think there's a logical argument for carrying extra ammo, and I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to throw the ball in your court for your thoughts.
Sure. Well, let's first talk about semi-automatic handguns. What you said is statistically what we've seen over the years. So there's no issue with any of that. It's pretty much the way things generally happen in self-defense shootings. Now one reason to absolutely have at least one spare magazine on you is if you happen to have some kind of a stoppage of your semi-automatic handgun. We all have seen over the years, and possibly things that some of the listeners have read, that a lot of this is attributed to the magazine itself. So let's say you're in a particular scenario, you put a couple of shots down range and you have a stoppage. Well, if you're in a scenario which allows you to move to cover, allows you to have that few seconds that you need to do it, if you're going to clear a stoppage, and we know statistically that a lot of these stoppages occur because of magazine issues, if you're clearing a stoppage and you're going to magazine problem and you put that magazine back in the weapon, you may duplicate the same problem. So if that happens, then it's counterproductive. So we generally teach people, if you do have a stoppage and you have that spare magazine, when you're going through the stoppage clearing procedures, you use that spare magazine to reload your weapon with, so that you avoid the potential of causing the same problem to happen again. And another reason why we like to have spare ammunition on us, in this case, again, we're talking about a semi-auto, is that we do teach the concept that after you've been involved in the shooting, you should be, if it's close quarters, not getting technical about the way we're teaching the fighting end of this, but we want to ultimately get behind some point of cover. When we get behind that point of cover, there's a couple of things that we need to do. You need to scan the area to make sure you're not going to be attacked again, or by the person that you maybe just shot to the ground. And then also, if the scenario is to the point where it's giving you the opportunity, that couple of seconds, to be able to reload your weapon, we encourage people at that point to reload it. And part of the reason is that depending on the weapon system is going to depend on how much magazine capacity you have. Generally speaking, people shoot more rounds than they thought they shot. So what we want to make sure is that as soon as we can, is practical, get our weapon back up to capacity. And the only way you're going to do that is to have some spare ammo on you. So even if you don't necessarily need that spare ammo to finish the fight you're in, there's other factors involved that make it kind of a critical thing to say that you have extra ammunition. In the case of revolvers, if you've selected that as a particular weapon system to carry, then obviously, depending on the system, you just, generally 5-6 shots is some of them out there that are larger sized revolvers that carry more. But that ammunition can be depleted very quickly in a close quartered fight. And you want to have the ability to reload that weapon if that happens to you. Because we don't know how many rounds it's going to take to put someone down. And as we said, you want to be able to, even if you've done that, reload the weapon as quickly as you can when the opportunity presents itself.
Absolutely. And those are all great points, Lou, and those are all the same reasons that I give the students too, why there's a logical reason why you would want to carry extra ammo, even if statistically that extra ammo will almost never come into play. It's one of those things where it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. And let's talk about one of the best ways that we can reload our handgun, and that's carrying a second handgun. And I'm also going to mention another free resource here on our website, livesafeacademy.com. Post 3, I have gun reloading skills, an article that I wrote on this particular issue that I'd encourage people to read. But I saw something that was actually very alarming to me, Lou, because when you look at gun disarms, what I've observed is that how they very often happen is when there's a physical altercation and the assailant will become aware of the fact that the defender has a gun on their body, or maybe it was open carry, maybe it's a law enforcement thing where they're already aware of that. They take the gun from the holster, but the person who's being disarmed doesn't know it. And I saw this very consistently with every altercation that I was able to view on video, in any firsthand accounts that I've heard from people, that they didn't know that they were disarmed at the time. And then what happens is the criminal points the gun at the defender sees the gun, goes for their gun, and then has that, and I normally don't swear, but just to make the statement, oh shit realization, the gun they're looking at, the gun that's being pointed at them, is their gun. And not only do I see that consistently for the altercations that I watch on film, but when we would role play these things with students, we saw that exact same pattern play out as it does in real altercations in the force-on-force training. There was literally a one-to-one. It corresponded to how it happens in real situations. And so now, in that situation, you've got one of two choices, a fork in the road. If you have another gun, you get to go bang also. If you don't have another gun, the only person going bang is the criminal. And that's obviously not the situation we want to be in. But then the other issue is, if our gun does go dry or it malfunctions, quickest way to solve that is deploy a second gun. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I've consistently and always carried a second handgun when I was on duty. And to this day, I do the same thing. And I won't go back over the things you just said, because you just eloquently stated the case for having a second handgun. But I'll just throw in that handguns are mechanical instruments, and they can break. And Murphy's Law says things happen at the least opportune time. I've had handguns break in my hand. In fact, I had a severe pot breakage in my duty handgun. It was the absolute last round that I shot demonstrating something at one of our monthly shoots, and I broke the disconnector in my handgun, which locked up the slide, and I couldn't even move the slide to the rear. I had to disassemble the entire frame to get to it, to be able to just get the slide to come off the handgun. That would have been, if I hadn't demonstrated it, could have been my first shot in a live gunfight. So these are reminders that we talked about injuries to hands. Well, if I've pre-positioned a second handgun on my body that is much easier to get to with my support hand, meaning my non-dominant hand. In the event of an injury, a gunshot wound, my hand got hurt in a physical altercation, my primary positioning of a second handgun is that it favors me being able to get to it with my support hand, because I'm anticipating me having to use that second handgun in the event that my primary hand goes down. And of course, still, if you have a part breakage or something happens to your primary weapon where it's inoperable. So, this is a personal choice. I'll just say this, that sometimes what turns people off to carrying a second handgun is that they think they got to carry something of similar size to their primary, or they got to carry something big, or it's not going to be valued. Remember, if you're deploying that second handgun, it's probably in pretty much contact distance with someone. If it's a reliable handgun, if it's a caliber that is going to produce wounding characteristics that are going to be valuable to you as opposed to not having anything at all, it's going to be a good alternative to go to if you really need it.
Well, and I think most people, when they carry a second gun, at least most of the people I'm aware of, both in law enforcement and the public, that second handgun is a pocket gun. And that pocket gun is more comfortable to carry. It's easier to carry than their primary gun. And I'll tell you, most people I know that do carry a second gun as a pocket gun will probably almost 100% of the time have that pocket gun on them, where their primary gun, they may have 99% of the time or 95% of the time, just because that pocket gun is so comfortable. So on the one hand, the funny part is, or the ironic part is, that if you want to make sure there's no guns around, hang around gun people. Because I don't know how often I see people that they're either off duty or they have a license to carry concealed and they're not armed, right? Which defeats the ability to be armed, that they're not armed. But having that pocket gun is a really comfortable way that you can carry even at home. If you're wearing your normal pants or whatever in your house that you wear outside your house, very easy to drop a pocket gun in there, and now that becomes a very comfortable thing. But the reason why I made that comment about people not being armed is it's hard enough to get people to carry a gun, even when they can, much less to carry a second gun. For some people, that seems like a very alien thing, but they may find that second gun is even more comfortable to carry, more convenient to carry than their primary gun, and they may find that that's actually the gun that they have them more often. Lou, I'm going to tease you about this one a little bit, because this is one I actually might have more experience than you, and that's winter carry versus summer carry, because in California, you don't have weather. We're in Michigan. We get all 4 seasons in probably 4 days. But of course, you have a lot of knowledge on this too, but I'll just kind of lay the groundwork here in that oftentimes people carry a bigger gun in the winter because they're carrying more clothes. It's easier to conceal. And then in the summer, they're carrying a smaller gun because they're usually wearing less clothes, and a smaller gun is easier to conceal than a larger gun. Of course, the problem with that is statistically, you're much more likely to be a target of an assault in the summertime because there's more pedestrian activities. And of course, the other issue is in the wintertime, depending on how they're dressed and how many layers they got on, and the mittens and the this and the that, they probably couldn't get to their gun if they had a 5-minute warning. So I'm a big proponent that you carry consistently all year long. However you're going to carry, you should be able to rapidly and easily deploy that gun, regardless of what the season is and however you may be dressed to accommodate the weather. I definitely disagree with the idea that you carry a bigger gun in the winter because you have more clothes and it's easier to conceal, but then a smaller gun in the summer because you have less clothes, and therefore the smaller gun is easier to conceal because I think you're much more likely to be a target of crime in warm weather.
Well, those are all great points, and I would probably also point out that, remember, the vast majority of your use of that particular handgun for self-defense is going to be for very close-quartered shooting. So you are going to be better off, personal opinion, selecting a handgun that is going to be suitable for you to carry year-round. and then train and practice with that weapon to the point of perfecting your ability to be able to use it. And then you're not going through these dilemmas. The only thing that you know, I did grow up in the great state of Rhode Island, so I do know something about winter weather, but moved away from there long before I would be concealing anything. But the point that I'm trying to get to is that in those climates where you have to get all bundled up, and a lot of times your jacket is going to be zipped up or snapped together, and it makes it very difficult to get to your weapon. There's where you have to be flexible in your concealed carry thoughts, in that you may have to reposition a smaller handgun that can be accessible to one of your coat pockets, so that at least if you get that very rapid, close-quartered scenario develop in front of you, you could rapidly get your hand on a gun in order to be able to start the fight. So, these are going to be things that I think you have to work through based on, like we talked before, the clothing you're wearing, the climates that you're in, all of these factors together to find out what is going to work best. And I think if you handle it that way, you can make good choices and have the best probability of defending yourself.
Agreed, and we're right just over that hour mark, and anytime we talk, there's so many important points that we want to make sure we cover, because I think they're essential to the topic. But I got this last 2 points that I want to make, and one of them is a longer point, so we're just going to have to be careful to be concise as much as we want to make sure we get out everything that's essential. But let me make the quick comment first, and that is, you've always got to vet your gear with your clothing. And the reason why I say that is because you can have a great holster system, you can have even a great belt, but as you wear different clothing on different days, you may find that the carry system that you have doesn't work as well with certain clothes as with other clothes. And I'll give you a great example of this, is that pocket gun. In some pants, that pocket gun fits perfectly so that I can, the gun is concealed, but I can get a proper grip on it and I can easily deploy it from the pocket. In other clothes that I wear, the gun sits too high into the pants and the grip can be seen. Or maybe the pocket holster doesn't sit properly in the pants. And this can be true too, like when I'm working with the medical examiners, we have to wear a suit, and where the belt fits with the loops on the belt loops it changes the way that the holster can be positioned. And of course, the belt doesn't fit as well into a suit pants as it does into my normal pants. And there's just all these little issues that come up. We trained one day outside, and I noticed that the rain made the material of my pants in such a way that if I tried to pull my pocket gun out, that it hung up on the material of the pants, and it made it very hard to get my pocket gun out of my pants when my pants were wet from rain. So that now I know, oh man, if my clothes are wet and I spend a lot of time walking outdoors, so I am out in the rain at times, then I have to know, well, my pocket gun may be my first choice in some situations, because I can establish that grip ready, my hand's on the gun, but they don't know it. It's not going to be my first choice if my pants are wet. So my point with all this is, you just need to know how your carry gear works with the different clothing that you wear and the different conditions that you might be exposed to, like if your pants are wet because of rain. So just make sure, listeners, that you vet all of that. Don't forget about that last component. And here's the last topic that we have to be concise about, but man, it's so important, and that's carrying a gun in a coat pocket, and also that grip ready position from concealment, in other words, that pocket gun. So, and I would never advocate that people just put a gun in their coat pocket. That's not what I mean, listeners. But there may be a time when you want to take your pocket gun and slip it into your coat pocket because you're in a scenario of elevated concern where you actually want to have your hand on your gun and pointed at somebody that you're worried about, but not be in a situation that they know the gun's pointed at them for many reasons. But I think both that grip ready from concealment, that pocket gun, and in that coat pocket, where it's not just a grip ready, it can actually be pointed at the person. A lot of tactical advantages to that, Lou, and you are definitely an expert on both of those concerns, and I've learned a lot about those issues from you. So why don't we sum up and talk about that?
Sure. Well, one of the things that is a great value to having a pocket carry handgun is that without raising any eyebrows, I can slip my hand into my pocket anytime I want and get a grip on that handgun and have it ready for immediate deployment. There's a lot of scenarios that you can get into that you may not be at that elevated point where you're going to draw your concealed primary handgun. However, like in my case, I carry one in my left front pocket, a J-frame revolver. If I don't like stuff that I see around me, it takes a fraction of a second to just get my hand right inside my pocket and right around the grip of that revolver, and I can make that immediate mental shift to say that, well, if something does happen, that is going to become my primary handgun, because that is going to be the most rapid one that I can deploy given that particular scenario. So, to sum it up, it's just a good tactical advantage that you can have in scenarios where if you had to go through the process of actually moving clothing, then getting your hand onto the grip of your weapon, drawing it, and engaging a threat, something that's very close to you that needs an immediate engagement. If I've already got my hand on a gun in my pocket, that's probably going to be the fastest way for me to address the threat.
Yeah, and when cops approach a car, as an example, on a traffic stop, people might notice sometimes that they have their hand on their gun. If it's that elevated circumstance where, excuse me, they have some reason to be concerned, in their mind, they might prefer to be pointing the gun at somebody, but they also might not feel that there's justification for that yet, but they are concerned, and they want to be in that position to rapidly deploy their gun, so they get into that grip-ready position. It's that compromise position that says, yes, I can rapidly deploy my gun. I would rather be pointing the gun at them, but the situation may not justify that, so this is what I'm going to do as a plan B. And what's nice about that is the time of drawing the gun, most of that time is from the hand going to the grip, not the gun coming out of the holster. And that's also where you have the greatest potential for performance issues, because people might not establish a proper grip on the gun. So if you have some kind of a warning that says, I'm not comfortable with this situation, then if you establish that proper grip on that concealed gun in that pocket, well, now when you go to pull that gun out of that holster in that pocket, you're so much faster. You've already established a proper grip, so you're eliminating those performance issues, and it's a tremendous tactical advantage, and you're doing that without giving up the element of surprise, without needlessly escalating, and without drawing any undue attention to yourself. So I walk a lot, and I had to return Louise a couple nights ago. And so I walked, I decided to walk for the exercise. It's about a mile away. Went to the post office box that we have for my school. That's about another mile. So it was 2 hours. It was dark. It was cold. I was probably walking around as late as 1 o'clock because I was trying to get to a movie place by midnight, and I probably left at around 11. So by the time I got home, it was probably like around 12:30 at night. As I'm walking back, out of nowhere, some guy, he comes up behind me, and he's walking in the same direction that I am. Now it's late at night, it's cold, so it's not normal that somebody would be walking that late, but it's also not unusual. I wouldn't assume automatically that something bad's going to happen, but it's definitely a reason to be concerned. So what do? I just get my hand on my pocket gun. I quicken my pace to see if he quickens his pace, and I make sure that I'm looking behind me often enough that he knows that I'm watching, and also that I can see where he's at. And there was a scenario where if that did end up being a problem, I was immediately ready to respond, but at the same time, I didn't overreact. I didn't cause a problem. he probably was just walking home from somewhere, maybe, and that was it. It was nothing that was going to be an issue, but it was certainly something for me to be concerned and aware of and ready for. So I think that position is great. And then the other issue is, you could take that pocket gun and slip it into a coat pocket if you're wearing one. So if you are at that elevated risk, you can actually be pointing your gun at the person with a revolver that's designed to be shot in clothing, like it has the concealed hammer. Now you've got a gun that can function within a pocket. Well, no one's going to beat you to the draw if you've got the gun actually pointed at them. It's not like you've got to pull it out of the pocket to shoot them. You can shoot them from within that coat pocket. And there's just no better tactical advantage. There's nothing faster at that point than to have the gun actually pointed at them, to be able to shoot it from the pocket. If they go for a weapon at that point, they're never going to beat you because you're already, again, pointing the gun at them. So I think that's a huge tactical advantage for those times where you do have that even higher risk of going, man, why is this guy, he's walking up to me, he's talking to me, he's starting to confront me in a way that makes me legitimately concerned for my safety. It's not a lethal threat, but I think it might evolve to that because of the way he's behaving and the other circumstances that I can observe. Maybe I can put that gun in my pocket without them seeing it, and now I'm in the best possible position to respond if something bad happens and I have to protect my life.
Absolutely, and it's a good tactical advantage to have when needed.
Great, excellent. Well, I think because we've gone over just a little bit more than that hour, we like to try to stay at that hour. So I think we'll just kind of rapidly end things here. But I want to remind people that we are going to do an after podcast show. Now, our podcasts come out the first Tuesday of every month. So when this podcast comes out the first Tuesday of the month, the after podcast show will be the fourth Tuesday of that month. So watch for our after podcast show, and we'll have a chance to go through the different holster designs, and we'll be able to talk about the different pros and cons, and we'll also talk about the different positions that you can carry the gun on your body, and then we'll also talk about the grip angle in relationship to the positions that you carry, because that's also very important. So Lou, thank you very much for being a part of this podcast. I always love having you on the show. I'm looking forward now to our after podcast show. I think that's going to be really great too. And if anybody wants to get a hold of you to have you come out and provide training, what's the best way that they can do that?
Well, the best way they can do it is to either send me an email via my website at Gunfighters Limited, and it's with ltd.com. And if not, if they go into my website, they'll also have my phone number and other means of getting in touch with me. I have a Facebook page, Gunfighters Limited Combat Shooting Methods Incorporated. And any one of these means of getting in touch with me could set the process up.
Great. I know you got a lot of articles and tactical tips on your website. I know you have a book that people can buy, and I know you're available for training. You travel to where they are, and you can provide training for groups of any sizes. And I highly recommend that. I brought you out many times in Michigan, and every single time that I brought you out, those classes were just phenomenal. I'm going to be bringing you out many more times in the future, and I'm looking forward to it. So Lou, thank you very much, sir. You have a wonderful day. Listeners, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this podcast. If you felt it was a useful resource for you, please share it with others. And everybody out there, have a great day and be safe.
Would you like to connect with Live Safe Academy, LLC? Would you like to help us spread the word so we can help more people? Go to livesafeacademy.com/connect to join our email list, subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, subscribe to our YouTube channel, like us on Facebook. Get free safety information and learn more about our classes and premium online learning opportunities. Because you have the right to be safe, no one has the right to hurt you, and you are worth protecting.